Welcome to URL Unzip, Reboot, and Leave, a podcast about the psychology that moves us. Through real conversations with thinkers, doers, and seekers, we explore how we adapt, evolve, and find meaning. So let's unzip, reboot, and leave. Today, our guest is Anneli Blundell. She is the winner of L&D Professional of the Year from Australian Institute of Training and Development. She also won Stevie Gold Award Female Entrepreneur of the Year. She is the author of The Gender Penalty Turning Obstacles into Opportunities for Women. She was past board member, Professional Speakers Australia. She specializes communication dynamics, help people get heard at workplace. And that's why today's our topic is psychology of workplace connection.
Yep.
Please welcome Anneli Blundell. How are you,
Yes.
Anneli?
I'm very well, thank you, Gautam. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
So, what are essentials for connection? Because we will talk about the workplace connection, both employee side and employer side.
The first thing that really has to be there when it comes to workplace connection, regardless of whether you're on the employer side or the employee side, is intention. If you have absolutely zero intention to want to connect with, your team member or a stakeholder or someone, a boss of yours, if you have no intention of wanting to build a true connection, anything we talk about here today won't make a difference. People can smell inauthenticity. People can tell when you're just, using a strategy or going through the motions. So I'd say the first and most important thing is to truly want to connect genuinely with the people around you. And then the second step to that is once you've made that intention that you do want to connect with people, is simply to be curious. Just be curious. Why are they doing the things that they do? What motivated them to make that choice? I wonder what's going on for them in their home life that, that they show up to work in this way or that they focus more on one thing over another thing. Like, just get curious as to who this human being is.
As it is intuitive and people kind of get it, but sometimes we also get confused and sometimes because of the power game things doesn't pan out the way everyone wants. How we distinguish between someone who is managing versus someone who is truly leading?
Well, I mean, there's many ways to make that distinction, particularly in the leadership literature. But if we're going to tackle this question through the lens of connection, workplace connection, then for me, the distinction is really around the depth to which you're willing to invest in that person. So as a manager, I just need someone in my team to execute task A, B, C. That's it. Right? I don't really need to connect with you. I don't need to know what your hopes and dreams are. I need to know, do you have the capability? Can you get the thing done? Get it done, right? It's pretty simple. But if I'm a leader, then the responsibility is a little bit broader than that. So we can assume that one of the distinctions between being a manager and a leader is the level to which I'm prepared to invest in connection. I don't just need to get stuff done through your skills and capabilities. I want to know who you are. I want to know what drives you. I'm interested in your future potential. I'm interested in what else are you good at and stimulated by and interested in that you could be bringing to the organization that we might not be it might not even be aware of right now. So a leader has a different level of investment in who you are, and by virtue of that, a different level of connection.
In one human level of connection as a human, yes, we can understand,
Mm.
but as it is a multicultural land, and I'm also an immigrant and coming from a different collective society to this individualistic society. And sometimes I also struggle after living 20 years in this country to get those like finer nuances, you know? Can we really understand workplace culture or individual culture as an acquaintance mode? Or We just learn to make our non-judgmental tolerance bit high.
So, if this question is really about if we come from another culture and we are living and working say, a different culture that's not been our national one or where we grew up, can we really become a culturalized into that culture, really subsumed into that culture? Or do we really just stand on the edges, talk the language, if you like, and make give it our best shot to sort of blend in? It's really an individual question because it's an individual experience. So, for example, if you come from a collectivist culture and then you move into an individualistic culture, it's a very different way of being. It's a different ethos. It's a different way of supporting team members, how you show up in the workplace, right? How you serve yourself versus how you serve the needs of the team or the group. All those things are quite different. And so, if you are able to be flexible with your behaviors without giving up your values or your identity, if you believe in a collectivist culture and you believe in community and sharing and shared responsibility, but you understand that you've been given a task for which you have solo responsibility and you need to deliver, against others as it might be, and you're able to do that, I'd say you're able to fit into that culture by changing your behaviors. However, the extent to which you shift your identity and shift those values, that's a different question. And you don't have to do that in order to fit into the culture.
Now, there is a big talk about creativity. Now, when
Hmm.
creativity comes, then you have to say something which is out of the rail sometimes, or whoever is listening, he or she has to be a bit of open with the suggestions and stuff. And sometimes I personally got caught into that. If in creativity sense, how much is too much, or is there anything actually is too much?
I think that's a really important question because I think what we want from people in the workplace is we want them to be themselves, right? We want you, Galdem, to be your very best self, be your most out there, your most creative, your most innovative. And then you're told that's too much, that's
Yeah.
too creative, it's too wild. And so, really, it's a balance because we want people to be themselves, we want people to bring their uniqueness. We have to be able to hold that uniqueness, especially if it is different from the group norm, particularly if it starts to, push at the edges of the status quo, or it starts to feel a little too different, a little too much, as you might say. And this is not just creativity, this could be risk taking, this could be innovation, this could also be being risk adverse, whatever the thing is or the quality is that you bring. The question of, is it ever too much, and who decides if it's too much? It can be too much for one main reason: if it doesn't fit the brief. If you've been hired to be the CFO or the chief risk officer, and you're in there with some wild, creative accounting ideas, I would suggest that's not fit for purpose. That's
Mhm.
not what you've been hired to do. So, in that instance, it might be too much. But if the too much is that it is too different from the norms of the group, as in, that's not how we operate here, Annalie, this is not our culture and this is not our norm, then I would say you have the choice as to whether you want to dial it back a little bit or whether you want to find somewhere that feels like a better fit. Embrace that side of you and celebrate that side of you and not try and squash it down.
I mean, I always used to complain and like couldn't fit myself in. That's why probably I am the other side of the spectrum, self-employed. Power dynamics in workplace. Okay. Because when the organization got bigger, they got little corrupted. People who are like managing their position is more important than doing their actual task. All these bits and pieces of corruption happens. And in that kind of an environment, not an ideal kind of an environment, courage to speak up, willingness to conform, how to navigate this power game.
Woof. That is the question of the century, my friend. How do we navigate politics? How do we navigate power plays? How do we navigate doing the right thing, speaking up, speaking out, speaking against, if it is politically dangerous, if it is potentially a career limiting move? It's really quite difficult. And in fact, I have a body of work that I talk about with regard to dangerous dialogue. And so this whole idea of, being willing to speak up or having the courage to speak up or conforming when, especially if you think it's not the right thing to do, is getting trickier and trickier because we're really losing our ability to have regular conversations, let alone difficult conversations. So for me, what I notice is that when you come into the workplace, either as a new professional in the workplace or as a new person into that particular workplace, you are striving to fit in, right? This is because you're a human being and we've lived and thrived for millennia on how we survive in the tribe. So we want to conform naturally because we want to be part of the group. And so what that means is we keep our head down, we pay attention, we might be people pleasing, we might be trying to do the right thing so that we can show that we're part of this group and we belong here. But the danger is if you're a professional in the workplace, you're probably hired to have an opinion. You're hired to have a perspective. You're hired to bring your experience, and it might be in direct opposition to what people are trying to do in the workplace. And that dissenting view really matters. It's in fact critical. You've been hired to bring that experience and expertise and perspective. And so being able to find the courage to find your voice and break through all that conditioning that your brain is telling you, shut up, stay silent, fall in line, because that's how you belong. That's what will keep you safe. You have to really learn to put that aside and say, actually, I'm not going to be eaten by a tiger in this tribe if I, disagree. It's different now. My job here as a professional actually is to bring what I know, and I have to move myself out of that conditioning and into the courage.
All right, so this is for the power dynamics. Now, let's say the power dynamic is fine, people are open, and still within that ecosystem, many times we have to handle conflict within ourselves, with the situation, with the product, with the services, how to handle conflict.
Yeah. Oh, you are asking all the big questions today, my friend. These are
Yeah,
really
I mean, I try to
important.
understand it because I fail doing that.
Right. Well, these are really, really important questions because, we're talking about the psychology of connection in the workplace, right? And we will have conflict in the workplace. That is what happens. You hire a bunch of clever, experienced, professional people, and they will disagree, and they're supposed to. And our ability to have those difficult conversations is what makes us professional. If not, we're kids in a sandpit, right? So, how do we handle the conflict? The first thing we do is handle ourselves. And most of the time, we are projecting that person doesn't understand, that person is putting pressure, that person is, misinformed. We're pointing the finger out. And I would say the first thing in a difficult situation when we're handling conflict is handle ourselves, because if we cannot regulate our emotional state, first and foremost, we will not be in the right headspace and heart space to have a productive conversation. So we know when our brain is hijacked by stress, I've said this and you've said that, and grrr, all of a sudden now we're in conflict. And my brain gets hijacked with this negative emotional state, the fear, the judgment, the misunderstanding, all that stuff. And when my brain is in stress, my brain literally closes down. So my ability to see you clearly, Gautam, is infected. Is I am unable to see you clearly. In fact, I'm more
It's
likely to
polluted little bit.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm more likely to misinterpret your behaviors through a negative lens. I'm more likely to make mistakes. I'm less able to think clearly and creatively and solve problems. And so my ability to function at my best in this conversation goes straight down, along with my IQ. So if I can't get myself out of that negative emotional state, I am of no service to anyone in that conversation. So that's why I say we must manage our own selves before we even think about going into that conflict situation. And then once we do that, we breathe, we take some breaths, we might go for a walk, we might just take a moment and let the nervous system calm down. And then we can come back, and if we can take the conversation from the lens of assuming a positive intention. What positive intention might this person have? So they're pushing you for a deadline and they're, on you all the time and they're not listening to you and they won't take no for answer and it's really starting to stress you out. And so you can ask, what's the positive intention behind this? What's driving that behavior from them? And it might be something like they really value excellence, or they really need to get it right, or they're under a lot of pressure from senior management, or they're really worried about things going badly because it reflects badly on them. So there is a reason people engage in these behaviors that get under our skin. So the first thing we want to do is understand why that might be happening, what's driving them, and how can we reframe their motivations to be something that's easier for us to understand so that we're more likely to come into this conversation with a better mindset.
As we are more into gadgets, more consumed within our own world, there is less and less human talk are happening. Okay. I'm not going good and bad into that, but what I am noticing these days is people are becoming more and more opinionated. It's getting harder
Yeah.
to have a discussion about something. Okay, it's maybe lack of awareness, lack of education, lack of knowledge about that subject, but it is getting harder. How to have a proper discussion, at least crack that discussion mode.
See, I find this a really dangerous thing that we're facing. And I'm glad you brought it up because obviously you're seeing it too, right? It's really concerning. Direct with their language and colorful with their language and say things online and hide behind a keyboard in a way that you wouldn't normally do face to face, which means we're getting bolder, and I think we're losing the ability to be more civil, and we're more likely to bring that style of discourse to the face-to-face discussions. Anyway, that's a different thing. So in answer to that first bit, so yes, we are interacting online in a way that we haven't typically done in the past, because you can get away with saying something to another human being when that human being does not know who you are. So that cloak of anonymity gives people courage and fearlessness to say whatever they want. They think it gives them license to say whatever they want and to not pay attention to the human on the other end. The other thing is, we know that when people feel like they don't belong to the same group. So, for example, if I'm in the out group and you're in the in group, so for example, we're a different race, a different culture, a different gender, anything like that. So I have a certain belief and I'm talking about my beliefs online and you disagree with that. So you're in a different group to me. When we have that in group, out group scenario, it is much easier. Studies have shown that people dehumanize people in the other groups more easily. So I don't see you, Gadam, as a living, breathing human, a neighbor, a friend, someone who I would never say mean things to face or in the street, because I feel like you're part of my community, right? You're part of my in group. But if you're online and you're talking some nonsense, quote unquote, that I don't believe in, I see you as not a human. And when I dehumanize you, it's dangerous because now I'm not thinking about your feelings. I'm not showing any empathy, and I feel licensed to say horrible things to you, which really devolves the nature of our discourse because it becomes shouty, it becomes aggressive, and we move away from dialogue and we go straight into destruction. So we're not even able to have conversations because we're not interested in conversations, because all we're interested in is shouting at someone we don't identify with and don't agree with.
In workplace, sometimes employees get caught up with ethical versus moral fight.
Hmm.
So ethical is okay, whatever is written. Moral is always individual thing. Because something can be moral to me, maybe not to you that much, and the vice versa. How employees or how people can be, balance this, not just strategically right, but also some core level they are also think that they are doing the right thing.
So essentially, if you think we should go one way and I think we should go another way based on our differences and an ethical difference, a moral difference, who's right? How do we figure that out? That's really tricky because I think there are a number of things at play there. One would have to be the context of the workplace. So we're talking about connection at work, and at one level, there will be the right thing to do will be dictated by the policies and procedures and expectations of the workplace. So I'd suggest we must start there to find common ground. But then if it's a matter of interpretation, like we want to get X product off the ground and you and I disagree as to how we would get that off the ground, then if we're coming at this conversation from the connection in the workplace, then I would do that. Find a connection in the workplace. So with any negotiation, I want to start with common ground. I want to know what's important to you. I want to know why this is important to you. I want to know how you're interpreting this. What's your perspective on this right now? I want to understand as much as I can about you so that I can find a way in to connect with you on common ground. Because when we can find the common ground, not only do we move from opposition and adversarial perspectives and conversations, we now stand together on the same side, looking over at the issue that we were talking about, rather than the issue being each other and being on different sides. So, first thing first, find that common ground, get onto the same side, and then tackle the problem from that other perspective.
Gen Z, because we are talking about workplace, we have to talk about them. And I don't really like talking about how disloyal they are and how lazy they are. I know they are not. Three genuinely good things Gen Zs are bringing into the workplace that older generations can learn from.
I think it's such a breath of fresh air that this is the question you're asking and that this is your perspective. And congratulations, Gautam, for not wanting just to bash Gen Z, which I,
And because from my experience,
Mhm.
I find them much more ethical than our generation or any previous generation.
Wow, that's interesting. Why do you say that? How come?
Because maybe they grow up with any country in the world with more resources than
Mm.
what we grow up with. And probably they have seen experienced more because of the social media and the gadgets perspective around the world. So they have a much better understanding what is wrong, what is right, and what like good for humanity. And so they have that bigger vision towards it. In
Mm.
general, all the time I'm experiencing that.
Wow, that's good. That makes me feel like the future is in good hands if we can just
I think
let
so.
them
I
let
think
them
so.
grab it. Yeah. So if I think about, what are the three genuinely good things that Gen Z bring to our workplace that the older generations can learn from, the first thing that comes to my mind is boundaries. I think they're pretty good at holding their boundaries. Can you do this overtime for me? Nope. I've got Pilates at 5. I'm out the door. That's what I'm here for. And the older generations, it's you just worked until the job was done, and you worked until maybe the boss went home, and you just did what you were told, no matter what it took. And, there's something to be said for hard work and getting ahead and stuff like that. But there's also something to be said for being genuinely allowed to have a boundary. So I think they can definitely teach us about holding those boundaries. The second thing is a focus on health and well-being. This is not a generation that is binge drinking. They do vape a little, which is concerning, but they're not generally, they're definitely not binge drinking, and they're not, working all hours of the night and, destroying their bodies. They are thinking about work-life balance. They are thinking about, their body is a temple, and that this is the only one I have, and how do I make it last? And again, you could tip this over into, maybe it goes a little too far where we've got the online health influencers and stuff like that. But I think in general, there is an interest in and a focus on health and well-being. And I think that can only be a good thing if it's nurtured in the right way. And the third thing is the questioning of the status quo, right? So it's really interesting that in certainly in my day, the leader was the leader. The authority was the authority. The person in charge was the person in charge, and you didn't talk back and you didn't question them and you didn't have an opinion.
And in Indian ecosystem is the senior guys. So it doesn't matter like where they're coming from or education or experience, doesn't matter. Senior, you have to pay respect.
Exactly. And so I find this really interesting that Gen Z, they don't really buy into that. They're like, well, you might have been here 20 years, but I saw this thing on YouTube, and this person had this different way of doing it. Why don't we try that? And it's like they're fearless in that way. And I think to myself, if we had that level of curiosity and that willingness to sort of, just sort of say that doesn't work for me, or why don't we try a new way, or that willingness to question authority and question the power structures and find a way that works for us and to do what's right for us, I think is incredible. Again, I want to say all of this needs to be held within the wisdom of the older generation. So I'm not saying question everything, it's total anarchy and never work hard and, never do anything past 2 hours work because it's too stressful. I don't buy into any of that stuff. But if we can take the good from the kernels that I see coming through in this generation, I think we can really learn a lot from the things that they're focusing on to find that balance. We never had that stuff. Maybe they've got a little bit too much of that stuff, but somewhere in the middle, we'll find that balance.
So we are almost in the wrapping up stage. As you are specialized on make people feel heard, what one habit we all can develop to do that, even when we are disagreeing with someone?
Hmm. How do we help people feel heard? I go back to where we started, curiosity. So be curious about the person in front of you. Be curious about what's going on for them. Ask a curious question. When you ask people questions and you listen with intent, you listen with the lens of truly wanting to understand, you make people feel heard. One of the issues that we have right now is that, we want employee voice. We want people to speak up. We want their good ideas. We want their feedback. But if people don't feel safe enough to speak, or they don't feel like if I give you this feedback and I give you this suggestion, that if I don't feel like you're going to do anything with it, why am I going to keep speaking up? So this idea of, how do we help people get heard is really focused on demonstrating that we are listening. I care about what you think. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, and I demonstrate that by how I respond to when you actually speak.
On that, we should end our podcast here. Thank you, Anneli. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Gadam.